when you meditate, what we're going to be examining, and I'm going to teach you to examine these 3 characteristics of your life. You're going to be deeply involved in rewiring your relationship to yourself and your triggers, okay? So the 3 characteristics, this also comes from Buddhist psychology, and Siddhartha Gautama noticed that when he meditated, he noticed these 3 characteristics arising in the flow of his mental continuum, okay? Here's the first one. The first one is that things are constantly coming and going. Now, we know this, but we don't know it as deeply as impermanence is embedded in who and what we are. When a person starts to meditate, you will discover, if you're really focused, you will discover that every single moment there's a flicker and then there's something new, and then what was before that is gone. And so when you guys meditate and you look at that light show behind your closed eyes, you ever seen how that just, you're watching impermanence. When you watch your breath, and that every single moment there's a distinct something and then a not, and then a something else. Impermanence, that's a characteristic of life. Life's a flow. And I think what happens to us as individuals is we get a little unnerved by the impermanence, because what reality is like to us is like standing on shifting sand. There's no solid place to put your feet. You can't line anything up that is going to last. Okay, and that can be deeply disturbing. But imagine the alternative. If life were not a flow, and we got what we want, we had some permanence, do you know what life would be like? It'd just be like this. And nothing would change, and then that wouldn't be life, right? And so we have to get used to the coming and the going, because it is true that no pleasure will last forever, but it's also true that no lousy thing will last forever either, which is good. And it's strange. We only think about, the pleasure going away. How many times have you been on a vacation where you arrive on the vacation and you're so excited to be there, but in the back of your mind, you're like, I only got a week here. Like it's already, Or you have to be you're at work and it's 9 o'clock and you got the rest of the day and you're like, when is this going to be over? Right? It's going to be over, but in both cases, pleasure has arisen and there's still that sense of, a lousy thing, this you'd rather be somewhere other than work, and you just can't wait for it to be over. In both cases, there's someone there who's making things worse. This then is the second of the 3 characteristics. It's called dissatisfaction, also translated. So the Sanskrit word for dissatisfaction is dukkha. And it's translated as suffering, but dissatisfaction is probably a better way to translate it. The du, in the first syllable, the du means like grime or dirt or schmutz, if you like. Okay, that's what the du means. And the ka in dukkha means, originally it meant the space in between the axle of a wheel. But the meaning changed over time to mean space. And so if you think about dukkha is that we all have a tendency of putting schmutz in the space. There's this impermanent flow of sight, sounds, thoughts, and sensations. So mental impressions, body sensations, sights and sounds, all of it is in complete flow. And out of all of that, we are dissatisfied. There's this background radiation of not liking. Notice right now, you guys, right now, watching, okay? Notice. You'd rather be doing something else right now. You don't think so? Wait until this what if I just kept talking and talking? Then, so I'm just telling you, sit here long enough and it's going to be too warm, or it won't be interesting enough. You'll start looking outside. It's amazing how we always want to be somewhere else, doing something else. I got a funny story I'm going to tell on my brother. So he goes to, he's in the Navy, he goes to this thing called SEERS School, and I don't know what the acronym stands for, but it's this very rigorous training that you have to go through in case you're captured, so you don't spill the beans, and so you get locked in boxes and all kinds of things. It's horrible. He's told me the story and he's written about it, and it's just amazing how hellish this is. And so he's a young guy from southern Arizona, and we have valley fever here, right? And so during this whole process, he gets a lung x-ray, which I guess they just do as routine. They find a spot on his lung. And they don't know about valley fever. They think, like the doctors think, whoa, I wonder if he has lung cancer. And so my brother's like, well, at least if I have cancer, I get to go home. And I know. All right, how much was he making things worse? And I'm not saying it was pleasant to be locked in a little box. It did suck, right? But in his mind, he's making so much more dukkha. And like he'd trade coming home for having cancer. But imagine he gets home. So imagine this is what happens. He gets home and he's at home with the cancer. Well, what kind of a trade is that, right? He'd be somewhere else and the dukkha would still be there, right? This is how we are. We are dukkha machines. And we all have habits of putting schmutz in the space. And so when we meditate, what we want to do is that's something I want you to begin to watch. The impermanence is super easy to see because there's just a flood of coming and going. The dukkha, though, it's important to recognize that that's there because you're going to think that that's me. It's not you. It's a habit of being dissatisfied that's masquerading as you. And what if you are sitting there on the cushion and you're questioning, like, what is this? This sense of, I want to get out of here. Like, what if you asked yourself and you didn't answer that question? What is this? You might find that it might be interesting to look. In all the impermanent comings and goings, could you find the actual thing that is dissatisfaction? What's weird is you wouldn't be able to. Remember when I took that cup apart? The same thing happens in these deconstructive practices. What I want us to do on a cushion is I really want us to begin to know that dukkha is a characteristic of making things worse. It's not like what Siddhartha was saying was life itself, that flow of comings and goings isn't suffering. It's the habit that emerges. And I think there's some relationship to the evolutionary impulse, right? Don't we all want to be happy and don't want to suffer? And we cannot get rid of that. That is part of what life is, wanting things to be better. But the dark side of wanting things to be better is getting fussy. like little Mr. Fussy Pants shows up when things aren't quite as good as I want it to be. Okay, we have to watch that in ourselves. So dissatisfaction, the dukkha, you can read all about that in the study guide. Now, this other quality, this is called anatta, or not self. And not self just means that nothing's actually absolute. So the impermanent flow of comings and goings, all the objects that you're aware of, none of them are absolute or self. They don't exist by themselves. They're part of this interwoven, interdependent web of changing things. But that not self also applies to the idea of me. Siddhartha is not saying that you don't exist. You do. You just don't exist solidly, which you're discovering. You exist more like a verb than a noun. It's not a solid something, it's a changing thing. And so the changing thing is great because then life can flow, but it's also not so great because you can't hang on to like the flower of youth, like that goes away ultimately. But what would you rather do? Would you rather have a life that actually is not life, that everything just stays the same and nothing is flowing? Or would you like to learn how to be wise and handle the lousy stuff when it arises with equanimity and the losses with some fortitude, but you're also in the flow of all the beauty, truth, and goodness that's arising, right? Like all of that's coming too. And so we have the choice about where to place our attention. We can condition our attention to focus on the dukkha. We can solidify an idea of a self. And if we do that, we're just going to make it worse.